in Lagos, Nigeria. I did an assignment in Bogota, Colombia, Islamabad, Pakistan, Caracas, Venezuela, did some time in Washington. I did 4 years in Mexico City, which is actually where my kids were born. So they are dual Mexican and US citizens. And we are here in Ottawa. I finished this summer, and then we are headed to San Salvador, El Salvador. So it's been fairly different, some challenging places, some interesting places. I think the thing that I've tried to emphasize that has really been the guiding principle of all that I've done is about being curious and building relationships. That's what diplomats do. It's about going to different places and learning new things and meeting a whole bunch of people, and then sharing about the United States, but also being able to tell the story where we're at back to people in the United States. So a key one of those, when I was in Bogota, Colombia, I had the labor portfolio. My first year in Colombia, 57 labor leaders, those trying to give workers a voice within their government, were murdered. And so my job was really to tell their story to those in Washington who are making some decisions about a free trade agreement. Based on that and telling that story, the US government then asked the Colombian government to make some very significant changes to how they treated labor law and those working to give workers a voice. And following that, we had a free trade agreement with Colombia, which we've had for about 11 years. So it really is about making sure that we're giving all people voices and being inclusive in how we are looking at our policy decisions in a place. I also have spent some time in Mexico City. I spent 4 years in Mexico City working on yet another free trade agreement. This one hit a little bit closer to home. Being from Northeast Ohio, when I was younger, I distinctly recall the debate over the North American Free Trade Agreement and NAFTA. So I was in Mexico City when we renegotiated the new trade agreement, and that was very much focused on making sure that all people were included in how we make our trade policy and how we make decisions on that. I have colleagues who do much more interesting, some days I will admit it feels like I move paper around in a circle, but I have a lot of colleagues who do really interesting and important things. So if you go to a country for whatever reason, and goodness, Lord forbid that you get sick or you end up in a hospital, I have colleagues who will come visit you and make sure that your needs are being communicated to the hospital because you might not speak the language, or back home to family in the United States or friends. I have colleagues who make sure that you have passports to do that travel, and who are really sort of there for the care and well-being of US citizens. And then I have colleagues who issue visas so that we have a diverse worker pool in the United States. People can visit their family, they can come on vacation to Disney. I've issued a lot of visas in my career for people who really wanted to go to the land of Mickey. And it was a universal sort of connecting point. So that's kind of what we do as diplomats. There's a whole bunch of us. We do different things in different places, and I am more than happy to answer a whole bunch of questions from you all as opposed to talking at you.
All right.
Anybody?
Who has the questions? I know you do. Yeah, you can tell.
I can think of some questions.
Go ahead, Leilani.
Okay.
Lay it on her.
I gotta think of some.
Anybody have any questions?
I'll start off just to
Okay.
get their minds moving. So same question that I asked the last time from the first group is what diploma do you need, or college diploma that you need, or whatever you need to do the job that you do?
High school degree. That is what qualifies you to take the foreign service exam. So it is test-based. I took a test now, holy smokes, I'm gonna say this out loud, 20 years ago, I took a test. And from there, I got an interview, and then from there, I went through a process in which I got a top secret security clearance and a medical clearance to serve anywhere in the world. But it all starts with a test. We have a whole bunch of folks who do a lot of different things. For me, it was a high school diploma is the requirement to take the test. It's the same for almost everything else. We have folks who specialize in IT, security, medical. It all starts with taking the test.
Go ahead.
So when you go to like out of the country or just different places, do you like have a house or do you just like live in a hotel or how does it work?
Great question.
I love it. That's a great question. It is one of my favorite parts of working for the State Department. They give us a house when we live overseas. So they assign it to you. I've lived in some really nice places, like the buildings have been nice, and they assign us. So it's based on your rank, the size of your family, and some of your personal preferences. For example, I have colleagues who always prefer to walk to work. Sometimes that's not possible depending on where you're at. Like they would never let us walk to work in Islamabad, Pakistan. We went to and from the embassy in an armored vehicle. In Bogota, we just don't have housing near the embassy, so you would have to drive. They also ask, like, do you have a cat or a dog? And they make housing assignments based on that. So the U.S. government provides the housing. They also provide the furniture, so you know what everybody's furniture looks like. There's nothing like having the same furniture as the rest of your colleagues. And I am currently in the only place in the world where the employee finds their own house overseas. So in Canada, it's the responsibility of the employee to find the house. The U.S. government pays our rent and our utilities up to a certain amount. We're capped at a certain amount. But we also have to provide our own furniture here too. But yeah, they give us the house. It's one of the unpaid benefits. It's one of the benefits that doesn't show up in our paychecks.
You said that there's one place that they did not provide your housing, correct?
Washington. And it is, for those of you who have never lived or been to our nation's capital, it is also one of the most expensive cities in the United States to live in. Did I mention I work for the U.S. government? The service to the U.S. government is really one of the great benefits, not necessarily our paychecks. But when you get to Washington, it gets super expensive to live there, but we have to find our own places to live and pay for those. So I've avoided it as much as I can. I see more hands.
Go ahead.
So you travel a lot. How do you educate like your children? Like how do they go to school?
So when we lived in Mexico, we found, like, they were little guys, right? Like, they were born in Mexico City. I have twins, so it kind of makes it sort of easy when it comes to the school thing, because they go together. I don't have to worry about different grades. But we found a little preschool. We did. The embassy sometimes will give you recommendations of where families send their kids. We found a preschool that was just 2 blocks from our house. And then the same here in Ottawa. We did some research, found this school. We are currently in the process of applying. I never thought that I would have to apply for admission for first graders to go to school. But we are applying for them to go to school at the British school in El Salvador. Most major cities have an American school, a French school, and a British school. And so we actually opted for the British school in El Salvador, and the embassy, the U.S. government will pay for their tuition when they go. But we picked the British school, really, and I hope you see the importance. It had a pool, and they were very fixated on learning how to swim. It's the best way for me to get. Jessica has done a fantastic job of trying to teach them how to swim in the summers when they have visited
Yes.
Ohio. But their number one goal for San Salvador is to learn how to swim without some sort of flotation device. So the British school it is.
I like it.
So how often do you move around then? If you're like enrolling your children in schools, how often do you move around?
Assignments are anywhere from 2 to 3 years. So we've been here, it's a 3-year assignment here in Canada. It'll be a 3-year assignment in El Salvador. We spent 4 years in Mexico City. Pakistan was a year, but I was single, not married, no kids, so I didn't really have to worry about moving anybody around. I started this job as a single person, and I was in about 10 years before I got married. My husband will not appreciate this. It's a heck of a lot easier to move as a single person than have to worry about your spouse and 2 minor children and a dog. We picked up a dog, something that I said I would never do living overseas, but apparently I am a horrible negotiator, and 2 small children won out on us getting a dog. So now we moved to El Salvador. Not only do we have to find schools, we have to worry about my husband's job and making sure he can keep working for the United States Soccer Federation, but now we also have to pay to send Maggie on a plane to El Salvador. So it's one of the great, great things about this life.
Hey, you got a question
I
back there?
see.
You don't have any more? Okay, up here, go ahead.
So how far out do you travel? Like, do you travel all around the world?
So there's U.S. diplomats in, I don't know, close to 200 cities or more than that, probably 250 cities in the world. I have traveled, whenever I've been assigned somewhere, I've tried to travel as much as I can in that particular country. So I saw a ton of Colombia, a bunch of Mexico, not so much of Pakistan due to security concerns. I saw a lot of Venezuela in the short time I was there, but yeah, it's part of that is the being curious and seeing and experiencing as much as you can, and getting out as much as possible. When I was in Pakistan, I did a bunch of trips outside of Pakistan, so I got to see places that I never thought I would see. So I went to Bangkok, Thailand. I went to Abu Dhabi. I went on vacation, right? I didn't go for work. When I was in Nigeria, I went to Ghana. I went to Benin. I went to South Africa. I got to see some really cool places. And I spent all of my extra money on travel as opposed to what probably would have been a more prudent thing in saving some of it to buy a house. But I thought it was pretty cool to go to Cape Town, South Africa, couple of times, and to Bangkok, Thailand, and I just also stayed in fairly nice hotels. I could have done it cheaper, but I'm trying to think. I've probably been in the last 17 years. I think I have visited more than 25 countries, something like that.
That's a lot. So when's your next venture? Where are you going next?
El Salvador.
Sorry.
We go to El Salvador this summer.
Okay, yeah, that's cool.
You always say it's like one of your things you said it's important to use your voice, and that's your job, right? Have you ever gotten in a situation where that like there's a conflict that might have come from using your voice or anything?
Yes, David, that's a really good question. So when I was in Venezuela, so it's using our voice, and as diplomats, it's about telling the story of the country that you are assigned to. And when I was talking to people who don't make the front page of the newspaper or who aren't featured in CNN. So when I was in Venezuela, part of my job was talking to students, talking to labor leaders, and opposition party leaders, and telling their story to Washington. And part of that irritated the Venezuelan government, and they sent 3 of us home in a process that in the diplomatic service we call being declared persona non grata, which means in Latin something along the lines of an unwelcome person. So they expelled us from Venezuela for using our voices, and they gave us 48 hours to leave So I left Venezuela with 3 suitcases, and all of my other personal belongings stayed in my apartment. I have good colleagues, and they made sure they got packed up and sent to me. But yeah, so sometimes using your voice comes with consequences.
Were you married and had kids then, or no?
No, I was not married. I had no kids. But there was 3 of us. The other 2 were married and had kids, and I ended up on the better side of that. It was very traumatic for the kids involved. Like, there's no saying goodbye to your friends. Like, they announced on a Monday that we had to leave by the Wednesday at the same time. So they got to go to school and say goodbye to their classrooms, and that was it.
But the reason I wanted the students to hear that is because even using your voice in that situation happened, look what you're still doing. And you're still in the same position, and you're still going to different places, and using your voice for what you believe in.
Yes, thank you, David. That's it. And it's using your voice, I have found, has been super important. And in all of this, I never thought that I wanted to be a U.S. diplomat. And I had a very good ally who recommended I take the test to then become Foreign Service Officer. And the number one thing that I always come back to is find something you love. And I certainly love traveling and meeting new people and learning new things and telling the stories of the people who might not get to tell their own stories. And be good at it, or be as good as you can be at it. And that has worked really well, but it all comes with finding people who can support you at every step of the way. If that's at home, if that's at work, if that's somewhere else, none of it's possible without allies and supporters and mentors. And then the coolest part, now that I've been doing this for a while, is that I have been able to support others and making sure that their voices are heard, either other diplomats or folks in the countries that I have been in. And I think that really is an important thing. It takes a while to find your voice, though. Jessica can probably would probably characterize that differently, since she has known me for much of my life. My voice has never been an issue.
Never.
It's different it's different to find your voice at home than it is at work. And once you do, use your voice. And I think that's really, I get to do it every day. I get to use my voice every day. I am planning for the president's visit to Canada this month. So I get to use my voice in helping to shape what the president's trip to Canada would look like. And frankly, it is an opportunity I never would have thought that I had. So just to throw that out there.
Okay, we have a couple more questions, so go ahead.
Okay.
So when you travel, you said you traveled to like South America a lot. Do you have to like learn the language? Like, do you have translators, or do you have to learn it while you're there or before?
So the State Department teaches us most languages before they send us out on assignment. So I spoke some Spanish before I joined the State Department. They have now gotten me to what we consider professional fluency. So that's helpful. But I have colleagues, right, who came in and didn't speak a lick of Mandarin and now are fluent Mandarin speakers, right? So the department does teach us languages most of the time before they send you out. In some areas of work for the State Department, they're not going to teach you all of it. They're going to give you enough to help you get around. Personally, I think in some situations we need to be giving people more language, and in other situations giving them less. We generally hire interpreters. So our local staff, all of our embassies and consulates worldwide have local staff in them. So here in Canada, we have Canadians who work at the embassy who speak French. So they can help us, because I speak only enough French to make people think I speak real French, and that is never helpful. I cannot conduct business in French. I can say bonjour, which is apparently enough to make others think you speak real French, which you don't. But we generally rely on our local staff to help us interpret and do that kind of stuff.
Elizabeth, can your children who are soon to be 6 speak more French and and Spanish than you?
They cannot speak more Spanish than me. So the kids were born in Mexico, right? And so their first language, because we had the benefit of having a lovely woman who helped us take care of the kids from the time they were born until they were 3.5. So their first language was really Spanish. They now won't speak any Spanish to me at home. But they fully understand, and so like when I get frustrated, I'll speak to them in Spanish and then they laugh because they're kind of like that. But they won't speak French at home either because they know we don't speak French, so it's of no use to them to communicate to us in French. They'll speak to each other in French, which I'm generally thinking is them plotting my own demise, but and they speak it at school. So, and we got a note from school that said that they were reading. We were super excited, right? Like, oh, good. Now I don't have to read quite as much to them. No, they can read in French,
Oh.
which I can't do.
No. All right, question you had in the back, right?
Do you think what you do said that? Do you ever get scared that if something bad did happen, that it could affect your children's life?
Did you hear that?
No.
She asked the question, if what the work that you're in, do you ever fear that what you're doing will affect your children's lives?
Every day. Every day. Like I said, it's a heck of a lot easier as a single person. I just made my mom, my dad, my brothers, my sister-in-law, and the rest of my family, including Mrs. Krause, incredibly worried for my health and well-being. 2 6-year-olds and moving around the world. We moved out of Mexico in the middle of the pandemic. So it's every day. But I imagine your parents worry too, right? And so my worry is probably a little bit different. The things that worry me being overseas, I worry that they won't be American enough, right? Like I worry that they don't understand the beauty and the promise of the United States because they haven't lived it. They haven't seen it. But I also don't worry about them having to do active shooter drills in Canada. So where I worry and where my concerns are probably a little bit different. And frankly, there are days I worry about them coming back to the States because they've lived overseas for so long. They don't understand what it is like to live in the United States. They do fairly well. They're pretty adaptable. They're pretty flexible. But I worry just like I think most parents do, just different stuff maybe.
Wait, did you have another question up here? Or you good? Okay, go ahead.
Are there any countries like the government won't let you work in because they're considered too dangerous?
So we don't have diplomatic relations in Iran, so we have no embassy in Iran, for example. We don't have an embassy in North Korea. We don't have diplomatic relations there. We have countries where we have significant restrictions, so I couldn't take my husband and kids with me. For example, my husband could go to Pakistan with me if he could find a job at the embassy, but the kids can't go. Cuba, I can go, but my husband and kids couldn't go. Venezuela, I just can't go. They could go. I can't even go on vacation. But yeah,
She's
there are
never allowed
places,
back in
and
Venezuela.
We have hardship ratings on stuff. And there are some places where they don't have schools for kids depending on certain ages. So high schools that are equivalent with where you all go to school overseas can be very difficult. And so that can change what's available to us.
That's great. Good question.
Good question.
That was a great question.
All right, guys, it is lunchtime.